everyone. I'm just waving to everyone now for a second, and we will start our exciting conversation just in less than a minute. And, I think he's joining. Here you are.
Hello, Olga.
Hello. Good evening, Your Excellency. Thank you for.
Good evening, Olga, and good evening, everyone.
Exactly, and good day and good morning for some, because I know that people are joining us from New York and from Europe, I'm sure from Italy and from UK and from all over the place. So here you are. It's so great to see you on this platform, and thank you again for your time. I know how busy you are with all the incredible multiple projects and everything else in your life, so thank you. I will say a few words about Conversations with Olga. I will also introduce you just in a few words, but obviously I will wait for you to introduce yourself, and then we'll just have our usual conversation as we always do. Sounds
Very
good?
well, thank you.
Great. So for my dear guests who have not joined us before, I'll say a few words about Conversations with Olga that I've started actually 2 years ago. It's an IGTV and YouTube series. I've started during the COVID breakup when I had more time, and being not very technical, I've just started it just like as I do now in my living room, just in front of the iPhone, and here you go. And the goal has been to introduce my dear friends and personalities whom I've met over my career to the multicultural Singaporean and global community through a platform that's accessible and interesting. These conversations run the gamut from intellectual to cultural exchanges to more personal stories and to talk to people to find out how they fulfill their dreams. My mission and the hope for this series is to inspire and cultivate more diverse and inclusive community that can learn from one another. So for tonight, up to now we have 38 episodes, and tonight is my 39th episode with my dear friend, his incredible guest, His Excellency Mario Vattani, the Ambassador of Italy to Singapore and Brunei Darussalam, and he's been to Singapore since September 2021. Mario, I will say a few words about you and introduce you, and then we'll take from there. Mario has held crucial ministerial positions both in the economic and cultural fields in Rome, the United States, and in Japan as well. He has an infectious passion to art and culture, and this is actually how we connected initially, if you remember, Mario, which has materialized into so many exciting events in Singapore in the last year alone, including art exhibitions and a film festival. A few more words about you, Mario. You entered the diplomatic service since 1991, holding exceptional positions in Rome, the United States, and Egypt before being posted to Japan, in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, with a focus on economic and cultural relations. You're fluent in the Japanese language, and you were even a guest researcher in the Institute of Japanese Identity in Tokushoku University in Tokyo. You published 2 novels and an essay, Svelare il Giappone, Unveiling Japan, published in 2020, which won the Antonio Semeria Sanremo Literary Prize. Buonasera, cara Maria. Benvenuta,
Buonasera, buonasera Olga, grazie mille.
So, I want to know a little bit about your journey, of course. And you've been an ambassador for quite a number of years, and it is a long process to become one. From what I know, sometimes people plan their careers early just by choosing specific fields and specific topics, and then after that they seek ministry positions immediately after graduating. What inspired you to be a diplomat? I know that you come from a family with diplomatic roots. How did it all start?
Well, in fact, as you said, the family component was very important in my case. I can't say that I really planned it. I should say that I lived in a I would say a diplomatic context since I was very small. I mean, of course, I was born in Paris, and then from there I moved to London, etc. So let's say that I grew up abroad, and that was, of course, specifically tied to the fact that my father was a diplomat. My grandfather was a diplomat. My uncle was a diplomat. As a matter of fact, my uncle was ambassador here in Singapore in 1984, which is quite a coincidence if you think about it.
Absolutely.
And a lucky one at that, actually, because of course I'm lucky enough to also have some family friends, you would say, in Singapore. That is not something that normally would come up in a case like this. So I would say that it didn't really need planning. As a matter of fact, it's quite the other way around. For many years, I was always thinking how to get out of it. I mean, I would have happily done something else. But obviously, you know, I felt also, I can say it now after many years, I realized that probably I felt a kind of inclination to continue somehow repeating what I had seen happen around me. Yeah. So I guess that oriented all my choices at one point, and whether I liked it or not.
Well, obviously the family's power and influence obviously was very strong for better for us, so, and for better for you. So that's great. That doesn't happen that often. Of course, it's not that rare that children follow their family roots, but in your case, to be third generation, I should say, probably, right? In a diplomatic corps, it's very, very impressive. And what were you the most passionate about when you first started out and when you become a diplomat? And what are the achievements that you were looking for when you started?
It's funny to see it from that point of view, which is very correct, of course, because most people choose a career because they have some kind of passion for it or something. In my case, I would say that it went a little bit the other way around, because well, my university preparation was the one that normally you would think of to go for the diplomatic career, because that was the normal way, is to go through political sciences, and then there's what we call the concours, or the concours, the exam, the state exam that allows you to join the diplomatic service. It's quite a difficult exam. It requires at least a year, I would say, of preparation. But I entered like a soldier, you would say. I mean, without many dreams. I entered in just to in a very unimaginative way.
Yes.
And then bit by bit, I started to understand that in fact I could follow some passions and some choices. And I would say that probably my love for Asia, and in particularly, of course, for Japan, but I would say in general for Asia, has really oriented me in my choices. But it wasn't immediate. It took some time to actually shape what I actually liked and what I didn't like. In the beginning was quite difficult, but it is the same for so many jobs, you know. I mean, there's no difference.
Yes. But nevertheless, you know, you were kind of growing up with a notion of probably you were educated as you were growing up. So some of the things were so normal and obvious. So you were very lucky in a sense. But what are the key? You just said that there are certain moments, certain key elements that shaped your journey as a diplomat. Can you share with us what are the actually key moments that come to your mind?
Well, if I had to make, of course, just to answer to one point, you know that normally, as you can imagine, this fact of being, you know, when people go for the state exam, there is, of course, a kind of polemic feeling sometimes among many people that say, the diplomatic career is, you know, is in the hands always of the same families, it's always the same people, you know, they know everyone, they get in very, you have this kind of, and I have to say that, of course, people like me, in my case, although we were very few to be sons or daughters of diplomats in my course, there were only, out of 40 people, there were 3 that came from a diplomatic family. So it's not so, you know, it looks bigger than it actually is. And definitely there is an advantage because, as you said, some things you know since you're a kid.
Yes.
So I can't say that it's not true, of course, that you are at an advantage in some ways. On the other hand, you also accumulate a lot of enemies, because all the enemies of your, you know, of your parents or even grandparents will take it out on you. But anyway, this apart from this, but the point is also people. You said, what are the things, you know, the places or the events that shaped your, you know, very, you know, the important ones. I think that a lot of this is connected, in fact, not so much to places, of course, that give you, you know, I mean, you find yourself from a moment to the other, from Washington, D.C., in my case, to Cairo. And of course, that's going to have an impact on what kind of life you lead and so on.
Yeah.
At the same time, the really important thing that shaped my career are people. Both my, I would say, my bosses, in the case, my ambassadors. I was lucky to have some very important ambassadors and who taught me a lot. And also the personnel that I worked with, because they also teach you a lot, because you have to adapt all the time. You see, it's a very particular job, because we change place, people, bosses, staff very often, less than every 4 years.
Yeah.
And so, so this is really teaches you a lot about people, and especially a lot about yourself, actually.
Absolutely. How you communicate and how you develop the relationship, but yet to continue and being able to adapt as well in different cultures with different people, absolutely, with different completely languages. Thank you for that. Let's move on to diplomacy subject a little bit. Can you describe a particular diplomatic negotiation that you were involved, and how did you approach it? Give us an example.
Well, that's interesting, because you see, there's many, I mean, there's types, or at least in the diplomatic career, in the Italian diplomatic career. But soon after you go in, you start splitting into some branches, you would say. I mean, some people concentrate, for example, on the multilateral. And you will find them dealing with UN, United Nations, for example, or with the EU, or with other international organizations. And then some of them just stay doing that forever. And other people go very much on the bilateral side. And then others concentrate on commercial activity. So you do have, you know, I mean, you do change jobs a lot, but you do have people that start, you know, falling into the same rhythm, you would say. So the truth is that I started in the UN field, because I started in disarmament, which is extremely complicated, and I don't miss it at all, I have to say, because it was I had to. But some people are real experts at this, I have to say. I mean, I had some great you know, leaders of delegations and so on that I was working with, but I have such a terrible memory of having to go through these texts and redo them, and it was a, you know, a tough job. EU was fun, because I was, at some point, I was also working in the Ministry of Agriculture.
Okay.
And that was tough, because of course in Europe everyone looks like they're friends, but the competition is very strong, especially in the field of agriculture, as you can imagine, food and so on. It still is, as a matter of fact. So these are the real tough negotiations that I was dealing with.
Interesting. I'm sure you've handled plenty of crises or emergencies in your life as an ambassador. Can you share or disclose, if possible, one of the emergencies? Give us a story.
Well, in fact, you know, it depends. Even again, then again, there's another difference. You know, some of my colleagues, for example, have served in many African countries, for example, or in very difficult situations in the Middle East. Some of them have found themselves in the middle of a war. And so I can't say, luckily, that that I ever found myself in this situation. I don't know what I would have done. So the crisis that I've had to deal with, being political offices, are crises that you actually don't want to show. I mean, the whole thing about the crisis is that you have to look like there is no crisis at all.
Yeah, I can relate to it. I'm very well familiar with this.
Yes,
I do it all the
can
time.
imagine. I can imagine. And so the truth is that when you enter the Foreign Service, the first years, they use you for anything. And so normally they keep you at night, you know, you have to take turns, and you're the one who has to be on the phone when something happens. And when I entered, it was the 90s. And at that time, there were no cell phones. We didn't even have a computer on our desk.
Yeah.
When I went in. And I remember having to deal, you may remember, of course, with the terrible Rwanda civil war. Yeah. And I remember these nights in the crisis unit of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where we had to take turns all night. And sometimes it was really amazing. We had to be in touch, for example, with the French army and manage to move Italians from one place to the other. And you all had to do this on the phone or with a satellite phone or with the radio sometimes. And it was, I don't miss that either, but I've got to say that it did give you an impression of how ample the kind of job we have can be.
Yes.
Of course, from then I moved to other kinds of jobs, but in the beginning there was a lot of that going on.
Yeah, definitely. So you have to adapt and you have to react and act very fast. That brings me actually to another relevant question. How do you stay informed about global events and developments, and what sources of information do you rely on? Because, you know, it seems to me that there is a lot of brainwashing going on from all sides, and we're all affected by it through social media, through different media sources in general, and it's all very, very confusing. So how do you manage, and who are your reliable go-to sources?
Well, this is the theme of today, isn't it? I mean, it's really,
yes.
As you were saying, I mean, this is something that really, I would say it's a characteristic of what we're dealing with day to day now. I mean, you know, is the information that I get based on anything real or anything? The fact is that of course, I inform myself like we all do, using every possible means of information. Of course, by working in the diplomatic service, there is the fact that you have an idea of how things happen behind the scenes. I mean, because we know how we give information. Yeah. So knowing how we give information, and we choose our words and we choose what to say and what not to say, well, at that point, you know that anyone else is doing exactly the same thing. So this of course gives you a little bit of a more, I mean, I don't want to sound cynical, but it gives you a less passionate approach about information. The other thing is that, of course, we're very lucky, I mean, to be part of a network of embassies and consulates general all over the world. So we have access to information which, of course, is not of publicly available. We can rely on that, and that is something that sometimes is really very precious.
Yes, of course. And you know, what are the most significant challenges that you face as an ambassador, and what are the skills that you need to possess to navigate those challenges?
I mean, they go, you know, as anyone who has, I mean, I could compare it a little bit to the job of the military, for example, or other structures of a country which are abroad. So normally, of course, you have to deal with resources and personnel and things like that. Most of our trouble, of our everyday trouble, is not particularly, you know, interesting at all. I mean, it's really making the machine work with always limited resources. That would be the normal things that we deal with. Otherwise, of course, as you can imagine, especially now, at a time when things are so complicated because of a war which we have in the heart of Europe, of course, there's been wars, and there are wars all over the world. But this one here affects us from very close. And so it causes a continuous attention to, then again, information, how we relate to our other partners everywhere. So it's not easy. It's not an easy job to do, but these are the problems that normally we deal with.
I got it. Mario, you know, I know you as my friend. I know your family as my friends, and I don't really, and of course I know you from being a diplomat as well, but how diplomatic do you have to be in difficult situations? And can you be very forward and open and express your thoughts fully and in the communicating with others? Basically, what is the threshold between Mario as a diplomat and Mario as an open-minded person, as a friend?
Well, you know, as seen from outside, or like as you know, the way diplomats are pictured normally, you know, it's always there's something fake about it. You know, I mean, there's something which is considered a little bit hidden or not clear. You know, there's a lot of formality involved, there's a lot of protocols, there's a lot of hierarchy and so on. At the same time, I can say from my experience, but also from what I've learned in my life, if you really want to solve a problem, and if you really want to, at the same time, because it's not only about solving problems, it's also about initiatives and creating things and doing something new, building things. If you want to do that, you've got to be real. I mean, people, there has to be sincerity in what you're doing. Absolutely. Because otherwise people, they won't believe you, and they will not work with you, and they won't work for you. So in fact, diplomacy sounds fake in many ways, but good diplomacy is in fact quite open and transparent and sincere. I mean, this is what I've learned, and I have to say that is what makes things function rather than stop, you know?
Yes, and I feel it, and thank you for sharing it, because I think it's very important for our listeners to know, to learn, and to accept, actually. Let's talk a little bit about adapting to different cultures. You moved from Rome, correct me if I'm wrong, to Egypt, to the US, and to Japan, and now you're in Singapore. Each culture is rich, but yet very unique. So how did you, or do you experience any culture shock? Probably you, not that much, because you've been growing up in diplomatic community and family, but nevertheless, are there any culture shocks that you've experienced from one country to another?
Well, you know, although my family was, as you know, a diplomatic family. I mean, although you know they were abroad and so on. As a matter of fact, my father was posted in Europe mostly. So I mean, and my uncle, of course, was posted here, but I didn't have any. You know, I didn't. So the Far East or that kind of experience was not something that I had experienced before. Definitely, whilst I mean, I'm very lucky. I feel very lucky because I served in countries that really make a difference and change your life. I mean, to be able to serve in Washington, D.C., I was there during the Clinton years, which was like extremely, you can imagine how interesting it was to actually be so close to all that situation. And then from there to Egypt at a very particular time. Mubarak was still president at that time, and and it was a life that I would have never imagined. And it was also the first time that I held an office of my own, and I was not even 30 years old. So I was very, you know, I felt it was a great opportunity to actually make a difference. And so I think that that is really the beautiful thing about this this job is this kind of experience that you can have, and I would never say culture shock, although definitely going to Egypt, I had to learn. And I was not the same person after I was in Egypt for 3 years than before. I learned patience. I learned even more that thing about sincerity that we were saying before. I learned also that you can really make a difference. I mean, in some places, you can really make a difference in people's lives just by taking a decision or another. And that is not always like that, you know. So, but that I learned in Egypt, definitely.
Thank you. Actually, you answered my question that I didn't have a chance to ask. What are the important diplomatic tasks that you learn or you have to learn when you move to another country? So thank you for talking about it. How do you adapt to the different social norms or expected behavior of diplomats in the various countries? Is there a little bit of a stigma, and you mentioned about the diplomats. So do you have to change of how to handle your office in particular country with local colleagues, with partners, and the embassy that has already been established for years in a certain country?
In my case, I mean, of course, I can't speak for everyone. But there's something that we always have to be, I think, careful of, which is not to fall into the, I don't mean it in a negative term, but in the expat trap, in the sense that you have to, the diplomat is different from, you're not just a foreigner living in that country because it's your choice. You have to, you need to, and you have to do more. So you need to be more open to live the same life, or in any case have the same experiences that the locals have. Because the locals are in fact your clients. I mean, they are the ones that you're working with and sometimes working for. Of course, you also have to look after, for example, in my case, for example, there's so many Italians who live here in companies, you know, they're working in companies, they're leading very successful lives most of the time. And of course, their choice can be to either mix or not mix, or to go in or not go in the everyday society. But we as diplomats should never fall in that sometimes comfortable error to keep out of the local society. I mean, that's but it's easy sometimes. But of course, in Singapore, it's not so difficult. But imagine there are some countries where it's not so easy at all to have relations and constructive relations with local people. So I've been lucky from that point of view, I've got to say.
Yeah, well, you're extremely friendly and you're interested and you're interesting. So that's obviously huge perks and huge factors. And I will continue a little bit about the relationships. What about the relationships with other ambassadors, with representatives of other countries? Is it like a little bit like a members club perhaps setting? Do you guys like meet regularly? I know that your wives or the spouses of the diplomats have, I actually belong to one of the gatherings where I see a lot of the spouses from them, different countries of ambassadors. So how do you guys behave? Do you have do you work together on certain projects? Do you entertain certain strategy that is suitable for that little members-only club? Can you please share with us a little bit?
Well, I mean, in the case of, like, Italy is a European country. It's one of the founders of the European Union, and so we have, of course, regular meetings with our European colleagues, and we do that. They are organized, and we participate more or less every month, and we discuss things and so on. And this can be very useful, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
But the relation with the other ambassadors is sometimes it can just be based on common interests or friendship or whatever. You can make friends. I mean, we do make friends, and we do sometimes meet in other places, especially when in the large embassies like UN or EU, Brussels or things like that. But in fact, it's very important. I think I've always been taught this, I have to say, by my father, by my uncle. You have to consider the other ambassadors also as very important sources of information, and and this is very important. They know it, of course. I mean, you're not picking the mind of your colleagues without them knowing. There is a lot of exchange. But one important rule is you always have to give something. I mean, there are some people, like in every walk of life, who don't give. I mean, they only take and they don't give.
Yes.
And then if you do that, you won't go far. So if you want to, I mean, it's give and take, definitely, even in the relations between our colleagues, which are sometimes informal, but in the end are also protocol relations. That is very important, and they're very useful friends, or sometimes adversaries, competitors. When you're planning something, you can imagine it's like companies, if you get that theater first, or the other guy gets it first, and you needed the space and he gets it first. So you can, this is what happens all the time.
Yes. It's a great learning experience, I think, for all of us. And what you're saying, as you said, it goes to so many other professions and in general, just life. So thank you for sharing it. What are some of your favorite cultural practices that you have experienced and that left a strong impression on you? Perhaps you embrace it as a part of your own way of doing things.
Well, working for Italy has some advantages, because what happens is that the kind of things that we can offer, the variety of culture that we can offer is huge, of course. Sometimes it's not matched, but this goes for many other countries. It's not matched by the resources that we have to send things around, as you can imagine. But we can luckily rely on sponsors from the countries that we are in. I mean, some people will be very happy, some companies will be very happy to host or to receive some art or some performance coming from Italy. The problem with this, though, is that when you rely on local sponsors, which is great, but the tendency is that they will choose the things that they want about, and they have a right to, because it's their paying. But the problem is that the risk you find at that point is that the tendency is to project always the same kind of art or period or performance that is associated in the mind of the local people with Italy. And so that is the difficult challenge for us. And this is what we did recently with this great exhibition that we held at the Arts House of Italian contemporary art. And in that case, sometimes you cannot, although we want to send that message and we want to give an updated image of what Italy has meant in the last century, for example, in terms of art and invention and design and creativity and innovation. At the same time, you can't do it if you don't spend yourself at this point. I mean, this is when it becomes difficult, and then you need to really mobilize resources, but sometimes it works, like it did in Singapore, with good results.
Thank you. Actually, I totally agree with you. And I always wonder, even looking on the project that you do and supporting you and supporting your projects, how do you balance your duties as a representative of your own country with your obligations to the host country? It's an international community. This is diplomacy on its own. How you kind of be neutral but yet passionate at the same time and respectful.
Mm. There's that expression which is intended negatively in the case of diplomacy, which is going native. Like it's dismissive. It means, that when you become the promoter of your host country, and not anymore, let's say, the promoter of Italian interests, in my case, for example, then you go native. So people say, we're not going to listen to this guy anymore because the interests that he's following, obviously because he's passionate about them or he likes them, are the interests of Singapore and not the interests of Italy. So it's a thin line sometimes, and you have to be careful about that because it's easy to be dismissed. In this case, from your capital. Because another very important point that sometimes we all tend to forget, I mean, diplomats tend to forget, is that the counterpart will only take you seriously if they know that you have strong political backing. And sometimes this is a very personal issue. I mean, it can even not, I mean, you could be a very young ambassador, for example, and have a very strong political backing, more than if you were an older one who maybe is from a different line than the government is.
Right.
So the error that sometimes we can easily fall in is to think that the counterpart, in this case, for example, Singapore, listen to me because I look like I'm interested in Singapore. But that is not what, unfortunately, we have to be more humble, and we are sometimes only instruments, and it's not only given to our personality,
Well, in your case, it's given to your personality also, seriously. Well, but thank you for sharing. It's very bold and very honest, and I really, really appreciate it. A few words about your beautiful family. Yumiko, who is my dear friend, and your two wonderful teenage children. How are they growing up in a family who is traveling from country to country, and what you think their experiences have been? Have they shared with you their feelings and their pros and cons and likes and dislikes?
It's funny because sometimes I hear from my colleagues, for example, especially with teenage kids, they start getting a lot of trouble from their kids when they have to go some other country, or because the kids say, no, I don't want to move, like I've got my friends. I've got to say that maybe I'm lucky in the sense that my two kids never really turned on a decision of this kind. Maybe also because we had this, since they were very young, we discussed together as a family, like, what do you think about going here? What do you think about going there? Even when it was Singapore recently, when we had to, there were of course, some other choice. We tend to have, it's not so much choices, but there are some other possibilities.
Yeah.
And I remember that we discussed seriously. I always take into account what they say, because it doesn't matter if they're small or older or whatever. It's important. It doesn't mean I do what they say, but I want to know what they think about it.
Yes. And
in the case of Singapore, it was good because they wanted to, and they knew about the schools here and everything, and so.
Yes.
But of course, if you ask me, what would you do if they didn't want to come to Singapore? Probably I would have come all the same. But the fact is that they know that I have gone through the same life in a
Yes.
way, and maybe there's a kind of mutual respect in this case.
Yes.
And I've got to say, I do respect their thoughts. And we have this game that we play, which is a game I love. I used to play it with my brother, who is also a diplomat, by the way. But we have this game when you know, the list comes out. Every year, a list comes out of the posts that are open, and it's amazing if you think about it, because there's the whole world, and you can see the posts that you can actually apply for, that you
Yes.
could actually apply for, and they are so different, of course, one from the other. And
Yeah.
with my brother, we used to play this game, and I used to tell him, I don't know, country A or country B, and he would say country B. Country A or country B, you know, playing with this game. And I started playing this game not so recently, even when they were younger, with my kids. And we do it, you know, in the car or something. And they play it too, and they say, okay, this country or this country. And it's a game of knowing what you would do, what you wouldn't do, and it trains your mind
Yes.
to be open.
Of course. And yes, and this is, I'm sure this is how they're growing up, and they must learn. So, you know, this being in contact with other diplomats and nation leaders, I'm sure. Is it a lot of pressure, you think, for them to keep up with world news and with being in this environment when they hear so much about all these world disasters or issues? How do you cultivate and how do you help them, I should say, to cultivate not only interest but also calm and normality in the city, in your environment, and yet to appreciate politics and diplomacy at the same time? I guess just like you've had in your childhood.
No, it's an interesting question, because I wonder a lot about you know, of course, history. Take history, for example, the study of history, which is very important in the preparation,
Yes.
for example, for diplomat. I mean, most of the exams that we have to do to get in are based on history. So the study of history sometimes in schools, I mean, when I see, you know, the way they learn things, of course, it gives me an impression, you know, this is very simplified. This is not exactly how things went. It's not so obvious, you know, there's no black and white, which is the way normally that a diplomat has to think. Because if you start thinking, you know, that's wrong and this is right, you can't be a diplomat. You can be maybe you can do something else, but not. I mean, normally you should understand what the other guy wants. You know, that's the whole point of, which makes you think, by the way, of the situation we are in now. I mean, diplomacy is extremely important, even when you don't see it, because the truth is you need to get into the brain of someone else, but not only understand what he wants, but also why and how he and why he does certain things. So that's the whole point. But in any case, so I find, and sometimes I wonder, because I see that my kids can be quite, I don't want to say cynical, but I see that their approach to history can be quite from a distance. And so, and probably because we discuss issues at home. But at the same time, I wonder if that's a good idea. When, I mean, especially when you're in school or something like that, you know, how do you approach? Because today's world is extremely simplified. News is given in very simple terms. And sometimes you are expected to give answers that go with the flow.
Yes.
And so you have to be very careful sometimes to look flippant or, you know, tepid about stuff. So I wonder, you know, this is something that I think we have to work on with the children also, you know.
It's true. You know, I grew up in an environment when I was a child when the history was rewritten a number of times. And, you know, when I read the same facts, the same period of historical history, it was completely different. So it's you have to be kind of receptive to that as well, I'm sure.
I can imagine, of
Yeah.
course.
Uh, a little bit about your work on a sort of like on a daily, day-to-day work as an ambassador. And embassies do so much to promote their countries, cultures in the host nation. And you are one of the really incredible people who promote causes and activities that are very close to my personal heart. And you're constantly working on one event or another. And I'm obviously, if I'm not wrong, that each ambassador has cultural interests in different fields, and they have an opportunity to organize events that perhaps or functions based on their own interests. And maybe I'm wrong, but be it art, film, fashion, and everything else, what do you think about it? And I know what you personally drawn to, which is, as I said, it's a culture and fashion and art, and this is beautiful. So can you please share with us, in general terms, your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, this is something that, of course, this goes very much on the character of people. I mean, although we all have to promote art and culture, this is sometimes not the first thing that we have to do. I mean, the first thing that we have to do is report and make contacts, because this is when we actually function. The time that you actually become active is when you get a visitor here, a minister, a prime minister, a president, or a head of state. So that is the time when, so we must never forget that this is the actual job that we have to do. We have to, when that time comes, we need to know where to go, who to speak to, also which are the subjects that are very important. So, and that is sometimes not the most fun thing to do, but then you have to cover all these fields. You have to cover political security, economic, commercial, and so on. Of course, during that time, culture and cultural activities, as I said, for a country like Italy, provide the kind of backdrop and also instruments for us to attract the attention of the people that then we need to speak to for very concrete reasons. But I would say that the same goes with food and wine and with fashion and with these things. So that's the kind of soft power that people normally consider in the case of Italy, but not only. I mean, take other countries are very strong at using their strong power, their soft power as an instrument. So that is, you can't do one without the other. There's no doubt. Of course, one is that it depends on your personal character, how much you enjoy doing one or the other. But I would say that it's a tight balance to keep.
Great. And now you're, since 2021, you're in Singapore. How do you like living in Singapore? Are there any favorite moments that are close to your heart? And have you developed the taste for our local delicacies? Do you go to hawker centers and do you experience the makan here in Singapore?
Yes, actually, I have to say, no, I feel very lucky to have been posted here. I enjoy every bit of it. First of all, it's a country where it's great to do my job, in the sense that all the people, the professional level of all the people that I deal with in any walks of life. Well, it goes, I'm talking from politics to government agencies to the military, to, because this is the companies, there's a level of interlocution that is extremely high. People are very quick here. They are quick to also change their mind, to adapt, which is very important when you organize, as you know, because you have a great experience in this, when you organize events and so on. So it's a country where, in fact, it's relatively easy to do this kind activity. If you, of
Yes.
course, if you give something, if you do it generously. I mean,
Yes.
So definitely, the life is great because you can. I mean, you can imagine for someone who likes Asia, you live in a
Yes.
multi. I don't even say multicultural because in fact it's a multi-identity world where you really can delve deep into the history and imagination of cultures
Yes.
that have lived together. And that, you know, when people say to me, but Singapore has, you know, we have a short history, it's not true at all. They have you know, millenary histories, as a matter of fact. If you
Yes.
go,
You're
I would
absolutely right.
love visiting the Peranakan Museum, which has just reopened, which
Yes.
was,
Beautiful.
apart from the fact that it's done with great taste, like many
Yes.
things are done in Singapore, I have to say, but it really gives you the measure of how much this country has to offer in terms of culture, as a matter of
Yes.
fact. And so I think that this is something that is we've got to work on. I mean, I love. I mean, it's important not to promote our culture or our products even in a kind of bullish way and saying, you know, we're the best, our wine is the best,
Yes.
or, you know, because that's really, it doesn't work. It doesn't work anywhere, but especially it doesn't work in Asia. And so the important thing I always think is to understand where you can connect, what is interesting,
Yes.
what is good to them. And if they don't find something particularly interesting, too bad, you know, and you can, you have to adapt to the people that you're talking to. It's useless to go there with, you know,
I absolutely
stepping
agree
all
with
over
you.
the place, you know?
Absolutely, because I cater a lot through my events and my projects to the Singapore communities and to Singapore overall. And you're absolutely right. It's very important for me to connect, to feel this connection, and to have a respect. And this way, people respect me. I don't come as this, you know, high and mighty who wants to impose with her views as a foreigner. Not at all. And you know, I definitely feel
You know,
completely integrated.
some time ago, some time ago, I will remember this because yeah, while you were talking, I just thought of this image, which
Yeah.
is a real image. I won't say who was who and which was it. It's a long time ago. Once I was in a country, in an Asian country, and I was accompanying at that time a minister. I mean, he was, you know, a visiting minister. And we sit down, and on the other side there's our, you know, our hosts, and you know, the meeting starts, and the hosts say, Italy, we love Italy. Italy is so wonderful. You know, I don't know. I've traveled many times. Your food, your culture, your art, everything like that. And this minister was sitting there going, yes, yes, you're very right. You're very right. And no, I mean, he was going to start the meeting. So I had to, you know, quickly grab his attention and say, now, Minister, it's the case maybe to say something about, you know, your impression of their culture, you know, because sometimes we have this idea that, you know, everyone loves us, etc. And we forget that sometimes they're just being kind. And it's not obvious that they really believe everything they say. So it's good to also share, you know, and to recognize and respect what people on the other side think of themselves, which is probably
Yes.
quite high.
Yes. Absolutely. But everybody likes you anyway. You know, Italy is really, no matter what you say, everybody loves Italy. Um, Mario, you're quite a Renaissance man, and you have written quite a lot of novels and essays. And can you share on what inspired you to publish your experiences? I will read a few titles for people, hopefully perhaps they would be interested in reading. And some of the novels are Doromizu, Turbid Water in 2016, in Mondadori, Milan, and it was a finalist in the Acqui Storia Prize, correct? And The
Yes.
Way of the Rising Sun in 2017, it was in Indravalante editions in Rome. Altair, The Current in 2019, in Mondadori Milan, and Rica in 2021, and Seaplane Editions in Rome as well. So you've written several essays as well. It's Unveiling Japan 2020, and it won actually the Antonio Samiria Cassino Literary Award and the Premium International Florence 7 Stars 2020 for nonfiction. What is it like to be passionate about writing, and what is it like to write something personal as a representative of your country? And does it really, are there a lot of eyes on you? Is there a lot of red tape that you have to walk through to clear your writing and to get it published?
I've got to say that because you see, there's one side of these things is novels. So the novels I wrote and were published by Mondadori, I was very happy to have such a large, big editor, publisher to present these books. Now, the great thing about the case of Italy, the diplomatic career, I mean, no one can stop you from writing a novel as long as you don't go touch things that have to do with your job. You know, I mean, you're not giving away some things that you shouldn't say, or giving opinions that you should. So in the case of a novel, of a fiction, and also in this case, it was also a very, how would I say, it was a dark novel. It was a noir, you know. So I mean, and all of them. I mean, the two novels that published by Mondadori are noir novels. I mean, so I enjoyed doing it. I was based in Rome at the time. Maybe I had more time than I have now, definitely, in fact. And I did it happily. But I didn't feel such a tension. I mean, I felt okay. The one that created me more problems, I mean, for myself, I mean, you know, that I worried more about was the essay on Japan. Because it's quite a large essay, which in fact I didn't want to write in the beginning, but the editor that I had from Mondadori had passed to another publisher, Giunti, and he insisted that I had to write a book on Japan, and insisted. Of course, I mean, it's, you know, it makes you feel important if someone tells you that you have to write a book. So I did it, but I was obsessed with the preoccupation of all the experts of Japan that could have started complaining, you know, about who is this guy to go and explain this or go and explain that. But in fact, nothing like this happened. It was very well received, and I was. But then I had this anxiety to get a good result, you know, because I'm not a professor. I'm a diplomat, so it's not the same thing.
Well, but nevertheless, well done. Thank you for sharing. Before we finish up for tonight's conversation, I would like to touch a little bit on the future, going back to diplomacy, on the future of diplomacy. How do you see the role of diplomacy changing in the future? And what trends do you see emerging in the international relationship? Personally, to be honest with you, I'm puzzled at times why certain political crises, war, for example, and the war that is happening right now, could not be avoided with the diplomacy. It's just mind-boggling for me. So can you please share your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, as a diplomat, I have to say that when normally that image, when diplomats close their, you know, their books basically and get up, and then it's time for weapons. It's the most depressing moment that you can imagine, because normally our job is to prevent this kind of thing from happening. It doesn't mean that you don't use the fear or the menace of things happening, but at the same time, when in fact they do happen, then it's too late. The Romans taught us many centuries ago that you have to, I mean, the only way to succeed is not to start the war, because if you start the war, you're bound to get hit somewhere. So the invincibility immediately falls. So our job is becoming more difficult in these situations, because you don't want to sound like a kind of empty pacifism. You need to still be able to negotiate, and you need to still keep attention on which are the issues that can be used to arrive to a peaceful resolution of things. The problem is that probably the social networks and this kind of the way information goes around now, in fact, instead of helping diplomacy, has made diplomacy more difficult.
I agree.
And it also made politics more difficult, in the sense that sometimes you find that politicians, instead of talking among themselves, communicate through social networks or press or so on. And this tends to make things louder, refined. And so, in fact, it's a difficult, it's a difficult world for diplomacy. But, you know, we have to adapt to all the situations that we have. So you will find that happening all over the place.
For sure. Well, and we are reaching the end of our conversation. I would like to ask for your advice, actually, if you can you share with us what would be your advice to give to someone who is interested in pursuing career in diplomacy, if any? What would be the profound factor or trait of the character that you should cultivate, perhaps?
It's funny because maybe because I'm getting closer to the end of rather than the beginning of my career. I get more, you know, it happens to me to meet young people who you know, maybe in a university or even in school, who are curious about the diplomatic service and what they. Well, I would say that first, you have to love your country. There's no doubt. It doesn't mean you have to love it in a stupid way, as we said. I mean, it's not that your country is the best in the world. But you have to always remember that you're not working for yourself and that you're working for a flag. And so this is, you know, not everyone has this, not everyone is ready to do that, because, you know, some people want to go private. And so, so that's the first point. The second point is that you have to be curious. You have to be curious, honestly curious, sincerely curious. You've got to enjoy finding out and listening and keeping your, you know, and keeping your eyes open, and especially listening to what other people say, and to understand the other side without, as we said, going native, because that can then, you know, it makes you fall in the other error. But I think today, for anyone in any country, anyone who's coming out of university, I mean, it's a great job. It has some bad sides to it, of course. I mean, the rate of divorce in the diplomatic service is extremely high.
Really? Okay, I didn't know about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's so it's. That of course, because it subjects the family to a kind of continuous stress. I mean, even the fact that you have to move all the time and doing, you know, I mean, some kids tell me, you know, I never want to be a diplomat. No, I mean, not my kids, but they don't. I don't see them going like, oh, I absolutely want to be a diplomat. So we'll see. But there are some bad sides. But all in all, I think it's worth it. It brings you to do all sorts of jobs. In my case, I've done all sorts of things, very different one from the other. And it's a good experience.
I think the open-mindedness and curiosity, as you said, are really great values to cultivate, and it's definitely important for diplomacy. Well, thank you so much again, dear Mario, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
Talked about so many interesting topics that only ambassador would be able to provide insight to. So thank you for taking your time and sharing your unique experiences and openly, and your thoughts and passions, and with all of us. I wish you all the best. I am seeing you very soon, I know, and I hope. And thank Thank you again. This conversation will be posted on my IG at Events by Olga, also on the YouTube channel as well. All of you, whoever's listening to us, you can also watch and listen to all my other episodes. As I said, tonight was episode number 39, and more to come. So join our platform and message me, ask me questions, tell me whom else you would like me to perhaps talk to in the future. And with more to come, thank you again. Grazie mille.
Grazie.
Mario,
Thank you very much, Olga. It was very enjoyable, I think, and it was, you know, I found it very interesting. Made me think also. And
perfect.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. And
thank
I
you.
look forward to everything.
Thank you.
Bye then. Bye. Thank you. Bye. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.